We're not talking about the best of them. We're just talking about the rest of them.
Not the worst parts, but the best parts. And the best parts we have. The best of the rest.
Hello, and who you gonna call? Someone else. Welcome to Best of the Rest, the show where we take a second look at movies that were poorly received upon release and challenge ourselves to only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. It's live action cartoon adaptation month, and this week we are talking the 1995 film Casper. My name is Chris Logan, and I am joined, as always, by my friendly co-host, Andrew Williams. All right, you ready for this one, Andrew?
First off, how dare you for that intro quote? But
Ruining my mystique.
Ruining my mystique. Yeah, I'm ready to talk about this. This is another one that, much like Flintstones, was like a staple of my childhood for a lot of reasons. Like, I remember, I think, going to see this in the theaters. I definitely remember owning it, like, on tape as a kid. I remember watching it a whole lot, despite the pure insanity that this plot is. But yeah, so I'm excited to talk about it.
I saw this a number of times growing up. I don't know if I owned it. Maybe I saw it on TV a bunch. I don't know, but certainly there was a period of my life when I was a kid when I saw this a ton. To the point where rewatching it now for the first time in decades for this podcast, I remembered certain scenes and line deliveries very vividly. Like, I watched it that much. And then at one point, I just never watched it again. And I feel like this movie, we can go through the numbers, like, it was a pretty good hit for the 90s, but like, its legacy, it has like no staying power. Anyone who was a kid at the time surely remembers it and probably has fond memories of it. But they don't seem to continue to be watching it. There's not like these, revisiting this movie. There's not like Alamo Drafthouse having Casper parties like you would see from some other like family films of the time. Like Jumanji, for example, comes out, I think, like the same year. People still know and reference Jumanji. Casper? Not so much.
No, definitely not, which is interesting. I think part of that is... like, they wanted to do more. Like, we'll talk more about the kind of the history of this film in a bit, but there's definitely no like follow through on anything. Like, it's a decent sized hit. I mean, it makes a lot of money, but and there was definitely a lot of plans to do more. It just never really materializes. So I don't know if it's a case of they just really weren't able to keep the momentum going. But yeah, this one kind of just disappears from the public consciousness after a certain point. Everyone, like, once I guess it ended that run on HBO after it came out on tape, it just kind of disappeared.
Well, let's go and talk about this movie's history, its legacy, if you will. Set the stage a bit. Take you all the way back to the movie's release on May 26th of 1995. It's made on a budget of $55 million. And at the box office, it does bring in $288 million. Pretty good hit, especially when you look at that modest budget. Critically, it's split, you could say, almost down the middle. It holds just a 51% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes that is based on just over 40 reviews, as these movies from the 90s tend to have fewer counted reviews on Rotten Tomatoes. But interestingly, I always like to point this out because it seems to be pretty rare. The audience score is lower. It holds a 49% audience rating on Rotten Tomatoes. And that's like over 250,000 reviews. And that's tons of people submitting their thoughts on the movie. So not only, as we were saying, does it not seem to much staying power, but I guess not everybody is looking back on this movie too fondly.
No, seemingly not. Yeah, like you said, not a movie that's had that kind of I don't know what you call it, resurgence or kind of, that nostalgic, like, look back at being like, oh man, like, you guys remember, like, there's nobody's like reminiscing about watching Casper as kids. They're not, this isn't The Mummy or anything like that, where we all kind of, maybe there's a few years where we're kind of going without it. and then we all kind of collectively are like, oh yeah, remember that? Awesome. No one's
Yeah.
doing
Or,
that.
hey,
for
when are they
Casper.
rebooting Casper? We're due for a new Casper movie.
Where's my Casper Legacy sequel, guys? Everyone's still alive. Let's do it.
The movie is written by Sherry Stoner and Deanna Oliver. Pretty cool. It's an all-female writing staff. Now,
It is indeed.
also an interesting choice because neither one have too many screenwriting credits to their name, but they both work in the industry for a very long time, predominantly in animation. Like Sherry is the voice of Slappy from Animaniacs, that squirrel with the hat that's kind of like grouchy, and was also an animation model for both Ariel and Belle for Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast, respectively, which, what a cool thing to have on your resume.
Absolutely. That's well, and if I may, Chris, what I do remember is that Animaniacs used to be billed as Steven Spielberg Presents Animaniacs. So Steven Spielberg, having at one point intended to direct Casper, obviously not following through on that one, but having been involved with the production, it does not shock me that he would potentially turn to one of the things that he was actively working on at the time to potentially headhunt some talent for this film. And it appears that is absolutely what he did, securing their talents to write the script here.
That is an interesting point, Andrew. A little connective tissue there. Steven Spielberg also producing Flintstones, we talked about last week. This guy, he makes a lot of movies, Andrew. He's got his hand in a lot of pots.
I should really check out his stuff sometime.
And then Deanna Oliver, also, like I said, heavily involved in animation. The voice of the titular Toaster in the Brave Little Toaster movies. So everyone who's old enough to have seen Casper probably also recognizes her voice as Toaster.
Another woman responsible for traumatizing your childhood. No.
And then together, they also co-wrote My Favorite Martian, the 90s adaptation of the TV show.
And they also were both involved with the animated follow-up of sorts to this film as well, serving on the writing staff for that. So yeah, an interesting little set of careers there.
The movie is directed by Brad Silberling in his feature directorial debut. Now, Brad has a ton of TV credits to his name, both before and after this film. His feature film filmography is a pretty narrow scope. He seems to be able to be selective about what he does, and there's a pretty good variety in his projects. Not too long after this movie, in 2002, he writes and directs Moonlight Mile, which is a movie I very much love. It's like this independent movie that I bought from Blockbuster during one of their like 3 for $10 sales. They'd sell like their old DVDs. You could go get them real cheap. I used to buy a ton of DVDs that way. And I just saw the greatest actor of all time, Jake Gyllenhaal on the cover, along with Susan Sarandon and Dustin Hoffman. I was like, hey, this probably seems like a good movie. And I watched that a ton in high school. It's a very good movie. It's got that $30 million movie quality that we talk about a lot, except the budget was much smaller than that. And it's just this drama that plays out with these characters. I almost don't even want to tell you the synopsis. It's kind of like a spoiler. But it's got a bit of a tragic synopsis where Jake Gyllenhaal's fiancée has passed away. And he is staying with her parents in the immediate aftermath. And then things happen. I won't describe the whole plot to you. But it wasn't until researching this movie that I learned that this was the same director, the guy that directs Casper. And since he wrote Moonlight Mile, it's a bit autobiographical. There's a few... He was pulling from events in his real life to make that movie, which is a bit tragic when you consider the synopsis I just laid out there. But Moonlight Mile, highly recommend it.
I will have to look into that. Yeah, quite an interesting career. Apparently, he directed some episodes of Brooklyn Bridge. That was a sitcom in the early 90s there about a Jewish American family living in Brooklyn, like you do. And Steven Spielberg, I guess, saw some of those episodes and saw that he had some potential. Not an uncommon story. Steven Spielberg would do that a lot when he would inevitably get flooded with projects and be unable to direct them all, he definitely looked around. And I think there's more than a few directors that definitely got their break thanks to Steven Spielberg. So cool. But yeah, some interest. And I even saw here that he dated Rebecca Schaefer until she was murdered in 1989. This is just a strange. Her story is quite a tragic one.
Hence Moonlight Mile, Andrew.
Right, that's what I mean. Like, but that was a story of a obsessed fan who went too far and actually led to some the development of legislation aimed at preventing stalking in the state of California where it happened. But yeah, so quite a tragic life in a way with his own versions of triumphs. So good for him. Still out there, still doing stuff occasionally, jumps in, does some television episodes here and there, occasionally a feature film. Directed the original adaptation of the Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events with Jim Carrey. Did the tremendous Land of the Lost adaptation starring Will Ferrell.
Tremendous.
Hashtag PP. Hashtag PP.
Okay, I see. I was going to say, I haven't seen the movie. I just kind of assumed it would be a candidate for a future episode of our show.
It would have been great for this month. Or last month. Whatever it was. But yeah, and I can see even here he's jumped into to some stuff even just this year. So still out there, still doing his thing. But yeah, gets his start here with Casper. And City of Angels is another movie that like I remember coming out, and it was the kind of movie my mom wanted to watch. Because it was a romantic comedy in the late 90s, but or a romantic drama, I guess. And yeah, a couple of big hits there early on that looks like it gave him the kind of freedom to do what he wanted going forward.
Well, Andrew, I think it's time that we jump into this movie. A bit bonkers, this movie, the plot of this film, as you alluded to earlier. It's got some
movie is insane.
Late twists and turns. So let's just jump into it. You ready?
Yep.
Dr. James Harvey travels the country with his daughter Kat as a ghost therapist who claims he helps the living impaired find peace and cross over. When he is hired to remove ghosts from a house in Maine, Dr. Harvey and his daughter soon meet Casper, a friendly ghost, and his abusive roommates and pranksters that call themselves the Ghostly Trio. Kerrigan Crittenden, the woman that hired Dr. Harvey, is anxious to get the ghosts out of the property she inherited because she believes there is lost treasure hidden within. As Dr. Harvey begins his work with the trio, Kat befriends Casper and learns that he doesn't remember his previous life. Together, they discover that Casper was the son of an inventor, and after Casper's death, he sought to invent a machine that could resurrect the dead. When Kat and Casper discover the machine in a secret lab beneath the house, they are followed by Kerrigan and her bumbling lawyer Dibbs. Kerrigan hatches a plan to kill Dibbs, use his ghostly form to steal the treasure, then resurrect him with the Lazarus machine, which has just enough formula to bring back one person from the dead. Instead, Kerrigan is killed and double-crosses Dibbs, but before she can discover the treasure, her ghostly form crosses over and vanishes. Casper seeks to fulfill his wish to be alive again so he can be with Kat. But before he can follow through, the ghost of Dr. Harvey comes home after he was killed in an accident. The one use of the Lazarus machine is used on Dr. Harvey. But that night, the angel of Amelia appears, who is Dr. Harvey's wife and Kat's mom, and grants Casper his wish for just one night.
Sweet merciful Christ, Chris. Also, the Crypt Keeper's in this movie. Jesus.
Also, there's a school dance happening at the house. Like, I still didn't get everything in there, but my God.
Absolutely, like, it's one of those movies that you watch as a kid, and you just watch it. Like, you don't have any
Nothing seems out of the ordinary.
nothing. You're just watching a weird movie about Casper. And then you rewatch it as an adult and you're just like, this movie is like dark for no real reason. Like, we find out Casper's tragic backstory. We find out that his father like dedicated his life to saving his son. And it's like all this, like, where I'm like, what is going on? Like, who? I guess all the credit in the world to the writers, because they put together this insane plot for this movie that at the same time is, like I said, as a kid, you never questioned it. So
I mean, it's
it,
bonkers, but it is coherent. I mean, it's well written.
Yeah.
Like, you're not lost at all at any point.
No.
You're just like, oh, wait, what? Secret lab? This is what we're doing now? All right. Okay, let's go.
Secret lab. Oh, his dad built a machine that could bring him back to life. And I have so many questions about that machine. Just like,
also, the machine brushes your teeth on your way down to the lab, Andrew.
Yeah, I remember, like, now watching it, I'm just like, wait a second. So, like, is Dr. Harvey's dead body still in that construction pit where he fell down and died? And how he's got this new body over here now? Like,
oh,
how does that work?
How do you think about that?
Because I was like, oh, he just walked out of the machine. So, like, it turns the ghost back into a corporeal form. But I'm like, but your body's still where you died, man.
It's like a very convoluted cloning machine. Like,
it's like the
creates a new
Prestige
body
before the
but other one's
Prestige.
dead. Bonkers stuff. We're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about all these scenes and the wacky turns and the best scenes. But before we do, we got to talk about this cast, starting with a high point, the best casting and best performance of the film. Because every episode, we recognize one person who goes above and beyond the call of duty, that they actually elevate the quality of the entire film with their performance. We recognize that person by giving them the Mark Strong Award. So, Andrew, go ahead and kick us off. Who is getting your Mark Strong Award for Casper?
I got to go with essentially our lead here. I'm going, not Casper. I'm going with Christina Ricci as Cat Harvey. She is basically our human conduit to interact with this crazy world. She's Dr. Harvey's daughter. She's been dragged all around the country and like his weird quest for kind of this whole weird mission he's got to help ghosts move on to the afterlife. That seems to kind of subtly be a ploy to potentially try and find his wife. She calls him out on that right at the beginning of the film, and they kind of make a pact that ends up being important later in the film. But she's got to do a lot of heavy lifting here. She's basically acting across nobody for most of this movie. And don't get me wrong, Bill Pullman is very much doing the same kind of thing throughout most of his performance, but there's a lot more focus here on Kat and Casper. So she has to do a lot of work here to make this story flow effectively. I think she does a really great job at that. I mean, obviously, this is coming off the back of the Addams Family movies, which were, I think that was 91 and 93. So we're just a couple of years after Addams Family Values. And yeah, not at all an easy thing to have to do. In Addams Family, she's part of an ensemble. There's a whole lot of pieces working together to make those movies what they are. But here, like I said, there's a much greater thing that she's having to work with to kind of make this movie work. And I think she does a good job of that. She sells the relationship with Casper. The relationship between her and her dad is definitely effective. Plenty of props to Bill Pullman for that as well. We'll talk about him a little more later. But yeah, this was kind of her, I think, right at like where she was hitting that peak as a child actor right after Addams Family. And she's still out there doing her thing. Just showed up in the Wednesday show, kind of bringing that whole Addams Family thing full circle. She's also on that show, Yellow Jackets, which I'm told is very good. I have not watched it. But yeah, doing a great job here. Like I said, essentially having to carry this movie. Like I said, I think she gets top billing, so good for her. Like I said, she essentially is the star of this, and has to carry a lot of emotional threads through this, and does a great job. So, Christina Ricci, Mark Strong.
Andrew, I gotta agree 100%. Christina Ricci also getting my Mark Strong Award for this movie. Alum of the show, technically, Christina Ricci. She was in The Matrix Resurrections, however briefly, so we got to talk about her a little bit already during Matrix month. but she is just fantastic here. And she's not that. Sometimes there's that qualifier where you're like, for a kid actor, they're pretty good, they handle it, but she's just straight up doing a killer job as the lead of this movie, child actor or not. She's definitely someone that I remember so much from my childhood because of, this movie and the Addams Family movies. And I always knew, she's going to be like this huge star when she grows up because she's already so good. And she has had such an interesting career because, she is a huge star. Like, people know her name, but she's not like leading blockbuster Hollywood movies. She's just made very interesting choices throughout her career. By the end of the 90s, she's in Sleepy Hollow, and then Black Snake Moan comes early in 2000. So she kind of transitioned to those quote unquote adult roles, grown up roles. And then she kind of bounces around and does TV and does movies. She's in Yellow Jackets here recently, like you said, very acclaimed. I remember friend of the show, my wife, watching this random episode of what's that hospital drama? Grey's Anatomy. And she's in one episode of that, randomly as this EMS person for that one episode. It's Christina Ricci. Just very, very cool. Seems to have a lot of control over her career and doing really what she wants, which is just, awesome. Cool to see. But great here, like I said, really, really carrying the movie. We're going to give our props to the people that bring Casper to life because they're obviously doing a great job as well. But when it comes time to being on set and acting, she doesn't have that ghost sitting next to her that they're bonding with. She's got to, use her imagination, play it up a little bit, do that acting thing that people talk about, which is not easy to do. We know someone to act off of, but she absolutely nails it. So I agree, very worthy of that Mark Strong Award, Andrew.
Thanks, Chris.
I also really like there's this bit of exposition in the movie where you first learn about this family, Dr. Harvey and his daughter, through hard copy. You see an episode about him. Yeah. And they say, Dr. Harvey, who interviews ghosts, and he travels the country with his loner teenage daughter, Kat. And it's why are they calling this girl a loner? Why? Other than to establish who the character is to us, the audience. In hard copy, why are they saying his daughter is a loner? How is that relevant to their story?
Yeah, and then the reporters went and found her at school and are asking her questions and stuff, and it's Jesus, no wonder hard copy didn't last past 99 or whenever it was. Yeah, I just thought that was wild, and I mentioned I sent you a text about it that the line right before the hard copy reporter starts talking is the Pentagon Playboys are going to have to wait or something to talk about this ghost psychologist instead. And then I found out that was actually a scandal, that the Pentagon bookstore was selling Playboy, and there was a whole big to-do about it. And I was oh man, what a simpler time to live in, That was the biggest American controversy of the time. Yeah, man. If only that was it today.
Well, we've already talked about Dr. Harvey, so let's go ahead and talk about Bill Pullman. Brings this character to life. Andrew, I sent you a text as well. We don't talk about these movies too much before we hit record, but I couldn't help it. I'm watching this movie, and it's Bill Pullman in the 90s, and he is just channeling 1990s Robin Williams. I would not be surprised if they went after Robin Williams to be in this role. It's Flubber level Robin Williams acting, whether it's reacting to the ghosts and getting scared, and that first scream that he does when he sees Casper. I couldn't get out of my mind that it was very much that specific of a role, that Robin Williams. But that's not to sell Bill Pullman short. He's doing a great job. Everyone loves the Bills, from the 90s. Bill Pullman, Bill Paxton. We know him. You love him. In their heyday of the 90s, when no one could tell the two apart, but Andrew, I know you're going to challenge me on that.
They don't look anything alike.
I'm not the only one, I swear. But doing a great job. I also had the observation that he dresses just like Peter Griffin. He wears green pants and a white shirt the entire movie, and I couldn't get that out of my mind either.
We'll have to send a note to the Family Guy people and see if that was a deliberate homage. You guys dress Peter Griffin like Bill Pullman from Casper? That's I know you like your references, but that's a deep cut, guys.
I mean, it takes place in Maine. Like, isn't like New England the whole thing?
Yeah,
I guess
sure.
it's kind of close, right?
Something like that. But no, I agree. I think Bill Pullman, he's facing the same task that Christina Ricci is. Just there's not as much focus, quite as much on his character. And he's having it even more so because he's dealing with the trio. He's dealing with the ghostly trio the whole movie. And he is up to the task. He is doing a great job. Bill Pullman in the 90s just had the strangest career possible. I mean, he's in movies like, obviously something like Spaceballs, which is late 80s, which, we all remember Spaceballs, where he had to basically be Harrison Ford. And then he did things like Sleepless in Seattle and While You Were Sleeping, Casper, Independence Day, Lost Highway, Lake Placid. Like, that's every single possible, like, genre of film that you could do, from comedy to romantic dramas to romantic comedies to something like Lost Highway, which is David Lynch. David Lynch is kind of a genre unto himself. Independence Day, which is a big bombastic action film. And then like Lake Placid, which is a borderline monster movie. Like, he really was everywhere doing every single possible thing in the 90s. And I'm never sad to see Bill Pullman on my screen. He shows up in a key supporting role in both of Denzel Washington's Equalizer films. And I remember watching those and I was like, hey, that's Bill Pullman. I was like, this is exciting. This is how wonderful. Like, it was just so nice to see him on my screen. Plays a real jerk in a movie called Dark Waters, which is about one of the many I was going to say it's about a corporate cover up of public pollution. I realize that doesn't narrow it down whatsoever. But yeah, great actor. Always love to see him on my screen, and he's doing, like I said, he's got a tall task here. Very similar to Christina Ricci. And he does a great job with it. There's a lot of emotion in his role. There's a lot of things that he has to convey. And I think, like I said, I think he does a good job with all of that.
I've never seen the Equalizer movies. Andrew, would you recommend them? Pretty good action flicks?
Does the idea of Denzel Washington beating up people appeal to you?
Of course.
Then yes, you'll be fine. They're not.
I've
they're
never
not like,
seen them.
Yeah, they're not like, they're not like the greatest action films ever made, but they are deeply satisfying to watch, I would say.
I've never seen them, but the poster for the Equalizer 2, one of my favorite posters in recent years. It is
absolutely
so good. You know what I'm talking about? Whereas it's just his face. It's just a face poster at first glance, and he's holding up a gun. But Andrew, there's no gun. He's not actually holding a gun. The gun is the title of the movie, The Equalizer 2. It's cool. It's cool.
It is.
It works.
They're making a third one, so you got time to catch up and watch the third one in theaters this fall.
All right. This episode of Casper, not sponsored by The Equalizer.
Brought to you by The Equalizer 3. What a strange tie-in.
Now we have to talk about Casper himself, the titular friendly ghost, brought to life and voiced by Malachi Pearson. The movie, the end credits make it a point to say introducing Malachi Pearson as the voice of Casper. But the kid's career was already well on its way. Tons of small bit parts and voice roles. I mean, this is certainly by far the most high-profile thing he had done at that point. But Andrew, he's credited in the 1991 Hulk Hogan film Suburban Commando. I mean, once
he is indeed.
You know you've made it. But after doing Casper, he does go on to continue to voice the character for the follow-up TV show. And then shortly after that, by the year 2000, he has retired from acting and moved on to a quieter part of his life, we can only assume. But I think does a great job as Casper. Casper, the friendly ghost. He sounds friendly. He sounds like a friendly, little, wholesome ghost. This movie, we didn't talk about it too much. It's based on a cartoon. It's based on old theatrical short films. And I think his voice and really the character overall, I think they really nailed that wholesomeness that comes from those old shows.
I agree. I think he does a great job threading that line of making, he's obviously a ghost, but he feels like he's a harmless ghost, a friendly a friendly ghost, if you will. And I do think he does a good job with that. Like I said, he's got to add life to this character of what is one of the first times ever that there is a character in a film, possibly the first time ever that there is a CGI lead in a film. Obviously, that's pretty common now to have, movies where there are full CGI characters. Not really at the time. I think this might genuinely be the first time that there is a fully CGI character in a lead role. So there's a lot of work that has to go into making that voice feel genuine, and to try to bring that character to life. And I think Malachi is up to that task. I think he is. I think he does a great job, and really adds that level to the character because he's a ghost that really doesn't want to scare people. He kind of hates that people are afraid of him, and it makes him be really alone. And that's all he wants is he wants a friend, which lines up perfectly with what Kat wants, which is also a friend because she's moved so much, 9 schools in a couple of years, as she said. She doesn't remember people's names. So they're both looking for a sense of belonging that they're just not really getting at that time, in their lives / afterlives. So yeah, props to Malachi Pearson for really bringing that performance to life and bringing that character to life in a way that definitely had to be difficult since this was really the first time anything like that had been tried. Weird thing to think that this is the first movie with a fully CGI lead character.
Wild, right? What a legacy. It's good bar trivia if anyone ever asks you or you want to lay that on someone. Andrew, do you know the first movie to feature a CGI character, period?
Tron.
1982. Does it have a CGI character?
Not really. It's like got there's CGI like things in it, but I wouldn't say any of them are characters.
That's definitely like where most people's minds can go first. It's like the first instance they can think of, inside a video game and all that good stuff. But no, actually, it is Young Sherlock Holmes, released in 1985. There's a short sequence where this knight comes out of a stained glass window, and he's made of stained glass, and he walks. And
that sounds
it's a pretty
awesome.
interesting little sequence. I know about this only because of Corridor Digital in their YouTube channel. They broke it down, and just another fun piece of bar trivia, movie history.
Well, that sounds awesome.
As long as we're talking about Casper, I guess we got to mention Devon Sawa, who technically also plays the character, albeit quite briefly during the finale of this movie when Casper is brought back to life as a young boy. It's interesting because this is, it's such a small part. He only has a couple lines, maybe 2 minutes of screen time, but Devon Sawa goes on to have a pretty successful career, so it's fun to look back and see the bit parts he was in. This comes just a year after he was in the football classic, Little Giants.
With the greatest actor of all time.
Good stuff. And then 2 years after this does Wild America with Jonathan Taylor Thomas. Andrew, one of my favorite movies growing up. I wore that tape out. I absolutely loved that movie. So yeah, you could say I followed Devon Sawa's career for a long time.
I think there's a lot of people out there that followed Devon Sawa's career. I don't think most of them were doing it for the reasons you did. But just things like Final Destination, Idle Hands, like this guy really kind of blew up in the late 90s, early 2000s there. And yeah.
He's the titular Stan in the Eminem music video for Stan.
And does it get bigger than that? I would say no.
No, absolutely
I would
not.
think not. I remember Little Giants. In that case, the greatest actor of all time, folks, is Rick Moranis. But yeah, he comes in here like, yeah, he kind of comes in just to be the real life version of Casper, and I'm like, man, it's the oldest 12-year-old I've ever seen. But it's actually kind of interesting when you hear him talk about it. He talks about how in the late 90s, early 2000s, he was trying to do movies like where the characters did bad things to get away from the heartthrob status. He specifically called out, like, he tried to find characters that smoked weed because he was like, you can't be a teen heartthrob if you smoke weed. And I was like, you'd be surprised. He is, yeah, but he has an interesting job here. But like you said, no, I don't even think just a few words, not even a whole lot there. I think he has a couple lines. But I just feel like it's so weird for Christina Ricci because I'm like, this dude doesn't look anything like the Casper ghost that just shows up and says, "I'm Casper." It's like that could be anyone. Like he could. Folks, talk to your kids about impersonators and fraud.
Now, Andrew, let's talk about some of the villains of this piece, like the evil Kerrigan, brought to life by Kathy Moriarty. Her and we'll talk about Dibs here in a minute. They are like Home Alone levels of 90s villains, right? I mean, the voice
unbelievable,
she keeps slipping into, that maniacal villain voice. So good, but so over the top. I really liked it though.
Oh yeah, she's got a like she's just like relishing every scene of this. Like it's very clearly she's just every kind of like villain trope of 90s family comedies just rolled into one package there, and it is absolutely like I said, she's relishing every second of it. And it's so weird to think that, you know, she got nominated for like an Academy Award for Raging Bull in 81 and then 14 years later doing Casper. But yeah, a picture perfect casting for that part. She does a fantastic job just making that character as unlikable as possible. And, you know, people say that it's not hard to make characters unlikable. I disagree. Acting.
She uses the old B word a few times. I don't even like saying that on this episode. I think I've edited it out before whenever it's been dropped. But in this, what is this movie? PG? I'm dropping that a couple times.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned, her sidekick, her attorney, it's along for the ride, who is simply known as Dibs, played by Eric Idle. I mentioned the Home Alone comparison. I mean, especially for him, he's usually the one, if one of them is getting hurt, it's usually him. He lights his hand on fire at one point when they're trying to light up the house with a lighter. I mean, he's taken a lot of the pratfalls.
Yeah, he's physical comedy. That kind of became Eric Idle's thing there for a while. I remember he's in European Vacation, the weakest of the vacation films, if you will. But his entire job in that movie is to have increasingly bad things happen to him through Clark Griswold's clumsiness and unfamiliarity with European traffic laws and what have you. So here especially, he is definitely being employed to take a lot of the damage, as it were, ironically. I mean, he's Eric Idle. I mean, you know him from Monty Python. You know him from all of the classic films that they did: Holy Grail, Life of Brian, Meaning of Life. I remember even the stuff he did before that, where he was like a guest on At Last the 1948 Show, which was John Cleese and Graham Chapman's pre-Python show with Marty Feldman, and Do Not Adjust Your Set, which was the one that Michael Palin and Terry Jones were doing with Eric Idle before Python. So all those guys come together. They've always been extremely funny. And yeah, I'm never going to be sad to see him pop up. And he's been out there doing stuff forever. I mean, he did Casper. He did some voices in Shrek films. He's everywhere. And he's still out there, which makes me happy.
And let's talk about this ghostly trio. You have Joe Napodi, who plays the voice of Stretch, Brad Garrett as Fatso, and Joe Alasky as Stinky. Mostly you're looking at veteran journeyman actors here, especially in the case of Joe Napodi, who was apparently handpicked by Steven Spielberg to play this role. Brad Garrett would go on to be on Everyone Loves Raymond, and where he definitely achieved his most mainstream appeal. And then Joe Alasky, again, another journeyman actor and comedian, playing Stinky. But may as well talk about them all together because they're always playing off one another, always on screen together, as you know, quote unquote, on screen together, as it is just voice roles. But expertly cast, especially Brad Garrett as Fatso. I mean, I hate that a character's named Fatso, but that voice coming out of that ghost, just, Andrew, it makes a lot of sense.
It does. You actually passed up Brad Garrett's most famous role, if you will, which was voicing Hulk Hogan on Hulk Hogan's Rock and Wrestling from 1985 to 1986 in 23 episodes.
I had
For
no
those of you
idea.
who don't know, that was the Hulk Hogan Saturday morning cartoon where he voiced Hulk Hogan. But
I want to hear Brad Garrett say brother.
who doesn't? Macho Man would have voiced that character himself. I'm just saying. But but yeah, these, like I said, these voices are all, I think, they're pitch perfect for all of them. They do a great job. They do a great job playing off of each other. Their antics are all definitely things I remember from this movie. I still remember that scene where they're all like scarfing down breakfast and it's just falling through their bodies, and just being like, oh, so gross. But yeah, they're doing a great job here. And then in turn, Bill Pullman, like I said, you don't know how this is done. I'm sure somebody's like reading the lines for Bill Pullman on set so that he's got something to react to. But at the same time, I can't imagine these guys were on the set and how that worked. But it all comes together very well. The camaraderie between the three of them is very good. The chemistry they have with Pullman's character, Dr. Harvey, works really well. And they're all doing a great job. And I guess we should say a big rest in peace to Joe Alasky. He passed away in 2016.
R.A.P. indeed. Andrew, that's about it for our cast. It's a pretty narrow scope. There's some bit parts here. There's some fun cameos we can talk about during scenes. But there's one I want to go ahead and shout out here. We're talking about people bringing Casper to life. Technically, Casper was also voiced by Jess Harnell, specifically for Casper's Arnold Schwarzenegger impression. Now, Jess Harnell is a longtime voice actor and probably most notably known as Wacko from Animaniacs. Again, kind of bringing that connective tissue together with our screenwriters and Steven Spielberg. So you can imagine that they saw that in the script, Arnold Schwarzenegger impression, and they thought, I know exactly who to call up for this role.
Yeah, Jess Harnell is fantastic. I actually remember him from a couple of things. Obviously, Animaniacs is a big one. He also has a band called Rock Sugar that has an album called Reimaginator, which the joke of the band and the setup is that they were a rock band stranded on a desert island with only a teenage girl's mixtape in the 80s. So the album is rock song, like metal songs or rock songs with like pop song lyrics somehow mixed into all of them. Like one is Enter Sandman, but the lyrics are Don't Stop Believing. And it's wonderful. It's annoying how well it works. But also he has a supporting role in a live action film called Comic Book the Movie, which is one of the lowest budget, cheapest looking films I've ever seen, but almost everybody in it is a voice actor. And it's led by Mark Hamill. This is like 2004. This is it's a very strange time where you could literally get like that high 8 camcorder, go shoot a movie, and if you were famous enough, people would release it. And Mark Hamill is the lead actor of it. And it's pretty funny. But Tom Kinney's in it, Jess Harnell, Jim Cummings shows up briefly in it, a whole bunch of people. But yeah, I did see that in the credits that Jess Harnell is the Arnold Schwarzenegger impression, which is what, 10 seconds? I mean, it's literally
one line.
It's not even, it's like a line. So it's so odd that they went out of their way to do that. When I'm like, was there nobody else available that could just fake that? And apparently not. So.
All right, Andrew, let's jump into this movie, this bonkers 1990s film that we have here. And what we're going to do is start off with the best part of the movie, or at least our personal favorite. Andrew, in your opinion, when is this movie firing on all cylinders? What is the best scene in Casper?
Now, I've mentioned I think I mentioned to you, the third act of this movie is absolutely bonkers, where it just starts taking twist after twist after twist. But I think my favorite scene, and I'm going to go with this because it's got a bunch of our fun cameos and stuff in it, is I'm kind of going with the first like face-off between Kat and Dr. Harvey and the ghostly trio. This is arguably where you could say Bill Pullman is channeling Robin Williams like the most, where it's just a lot of comedy, pratfall type stuff. But it's where the kind of manic energy of the film kind of combines the ghosts and the humans for the first time. You get a lot of fun sight gags. And this is really also I like because it's where Dr. Harvey kind of asserts himself against these guys. Because to this point, they've been running scared. This is kind of where he fights back, and he realizes that he can stand against these guys. And I kind of like that weird message in a certain way. But it kind of begins with this weird sort of pseudo possession sequence, which has a bunch of our cameos in this movie in it, where the ghost kind of enter his body. And I don't know if the implication here is supposed to be that these people he's turning into are kind of how the ghosts view themselves, or if it's are the ghosts just pop culturally relevant at the time?
I don't really know.
I have no idea. But they jump into his body, kind of like splashes his face with some water, and he looks in the mirror, and first he turns into Clint Eastwood, who says some line in his Clint Eastwood voice as he would. Then he turns into Rodney Dangerfield. And then he turns to Mel Gibson. And he's like, oh, he's kind of impressed when he's Mel Gibson, because this is back when Mel Gibson was attractive. We hadn't found out how ugly he was on the inside yet. But then the last one is genuinely the Crypt Keeper. And it's literally John Casser doing the voice and Brock Winkless doing the puppetry, who both did it on Tales from the Crypt. And so it's just another cameo where I'm like, you guys went so hard on this for like no reason whatsoever, but the movie is all the better for it.
Not only is it the Crypt Keeper, but it's the Crypt Keeper imitating Macaulay Culkin in Home Alone. It's the Crypt Keeper putting his hands on his cheeks and screaming.
Yeah.
It's a twofer there.
It's a layered reference. So many things going on there. But those are all rapid fire too. They're in like 20 seconds. It's absolutely ridiculous that they got all that for this film, but I guess when Steven Spielberg's your producer, he can call in some favors. Spielberg himself was actually apparently supposed to be one of those cameos, but he said he wasn't comfortable in front of the camera, and he also said it affected the pacing. I think that's just an excuse. Because I'm like, I don't think another 5 seconds there would have hurt anything. But after that, they kind of leave, and this leads to this big extended showdown where like he's kind of running scared. They've got swords, genuinely. Like at one point, they straight up throw swords at this guy. And it's kind of, this is a moment where I'm watching it and I'm like, wow, this is kind of dark. But ultimately, he fights back with a plunger, like you do. And then they abandon the swords to have sword fights with him using like umbrellas and stuff. So I don't know why they just gave up on the swords, but they all start having this extended sequence. But this is kind of what I'm talking about. Like you talk about that Robin Williams energy. Like this starts, he like puts his foot in like a bucket and like falls down these stairs. And then he's having all these extended fights with these guys using plungers. And then eventually he sucks them all into a vacuum. And, you know, it's absolute ridiculousness. It's insanity. It's over the top. But I feel like it's where everything comes together for the first time. And that's kind of like you said, when you're dealing with a situation of having to play off of these non-existent characters to make that work, to make it effective, and to make it pretty funny ultimately. Is no easy task. So props to Bill Pullman, props to Christina Ricci, but also props to our director, obviously Brad Soberling. That's got to be a tough thing to do, especially when this is not a widely accepted practice at the time. To kind of make all that work and have to fit everything together, it is a great job done by all involved. But I think it's where that kind of manic energy of everything comes together for the first time really well, and also kind of leads to that weird level of respect that Dr. Harvey and the ghostly trio kind of form together. So yeah, like I said, it's pretty early on, probably towards the end of the first act, start of the second act, but I think that's one of the best scenes in the movie, where it all, like I said, it's all coming together for the first time, and it's done extremely well.
Great pick, Andrew. Yeah, those cameos are ridiculous. I can't get over Rodney Dangerfield. Just
what a
that
topical
one seems
reference.
The most random. I know, right? Clint Eastwood, Mel Gibson, and Rodney Dangerfield. You know, the three biggest stars. It cracks me up. And this is already after we had Dan Aykroyd earlier in the movie, and
Don Novello. Like Jesus, like Father Guido Sarducci is in this movie. Like it is absolutely like that. This movie goes really hard on the cameos for like no real reason. Like, and like it's genuinely like Terry Murphy was the actual host of Hard Copy. And they got her to kind of, you know, narrate this story there with, about Dr. Harvey. But yeah, even those early ones with Dan Aykroyd just like runs out of the house and is like, your titular line for the episode. Who are you going to call? Somebody else. And then, Father Guido Sarducci. One of the, that's one that, I still can't really wrap my head around. It's like, who making a Casper movie in 1994 was like, you know what this movie needs? Don Novello.
I mean, me as a kid watching it, I have no idea who this character
exactly.
is or why he's out
my
here.
My parents did. My parents, I guess that's a cameo for the parents because my dad was like, I remember my dad even as a kid just being like, what? Why is he here? I don't understand.
But when he walks out with his head backwards, Andrew, that's some freaky stuff.
It is
that
wild.
Freaked me out for sure.
You gonna walk that off, dude? You seem fine.
No, I mean, I like your pick though. I like we're kind of establishing the rules. The rules are loose, but establishing the rules of these ghosts, they can go through walls, but they can interact with objects seemingly at will. They choose whether or not they can pick up that sword and throw it or what have you. You kind of think that the sucking them into a vacuum works as a way to stop them, but of course not. What's special about a vacuum bag that's going to stop a ghost from being able to get out? They were just playing along, and they resurface again later. But I do like the relationship between the trio and Dr. Harvey, and they give him a lot of crap before they finally break him, I guess, and he decides to come around, and then that's when ultimately he dies later in the movie. But Andrew, it's a good pick for best scene. I'm thinking a lot of the stuff that really works in this movie is highlighted here. A great point about our director. This director probably did not have a lot of experience with CGI characters because nobody in 1995 had a lot of experience with CGI characters, but you wouldn't be able to tell. They do have ILM working on this movie, so you get the best in the business at work alongside them. That certainly helps, but a lot of credit for our director for making it all work. Andrew, for my favorite scene, I'm going to take it in a different direction. I think I want to highlight some of the more quieter and sentimental scenes in this movie. Because I think if there's anything that separates this film from the other hijinks-filled family movies of the 90s, it's the quieter scenes with Casper and Kat. Whether he is longing to not say be in a relationship with her, but just be able to express his romantic feelings for her and have them reciprocated, whether it's that longing or his longing for, remembering his life and who he was. It deals with some kind of heavy themes, but I think in a way that isn't going to traumatize a kid or make him ask very weird questions. There's some stuff in this movie that'll traumatize a kid, don't get me wrong, but I don't think it's some of the themes that they touch on, and I got to applaud our screenwriters for putting that into this movie. So I think I'm going to shout out maybe two scenes, but if I got to go with one, I like whenever Casper and Kat are bonding, and he's starting to express his feelings, and he carries her out the window. Pretty scary stuff. Carries her by one leg, and takes her to this lighthouse, and they are just sitting quietly at this beautiful view, and that's when Kat learns that he doesn't remember his life and who he was, and he asks, is that bad? She's like, no, it's just kind of sad. And they just have this somber moment together, which I wouldn't expect from Casper the Friendly Ghost or a family movie from the 90s. I think that scene, coupled with the scene that comes a little bit later, where they go up to the attic and they find Casper's old stuff, and he starts to see these newspaper clippings in the sled and remember his life and how he died and who he was and reflect on his family. It's, again, dealing with some heavy stuff, and you might look at it and be like, well, that kind of comes out of nowhere. It kind of does. But, again, because it stands out so much, and I think it separates this film from so many others that came out at the time, I think I'm going to highlight them as my favorite. I think they truly elevate the film.
I think this is a great pick. I was just trying to avoid emotional sequences after Guardians of the Galaxy, and this movie was too bad. But no, I think this is a great pick. And like I said, it's kind of one of the, in a way, it feels like some of the criticisms of the film was that this movie kind of gets strangely dark, going into Casper's backstory. We basically find out, not to take the podcast in too dark a direction, that Casper basically got pneumonia as a child and died. And then his father dedicated the entire rest of his life to trying to build a machine that would bring him back to life. Which, like you do.
Which he apparently succeeds in doing, building the machine.
Yes.
But you also see via like a newspaper clipping that he was put in a mental asylum when people
could he not just show them that the machine worked? Like that's the part that gets me there. It's like did they drag him away right after he finished it? He's like, I'm so close, and then they drag him away to the mental institution. Because so the plot like just takes this like turn where like to this point like you're kind of just, this is Casper, this is his house, this is his thing. They're kind of bonding over their sense of not having friends, and then it dives into this backstory of Casper, and this like immense guilt that his father feels because like he feels responsible for the fact that he got pneumonia, and takes on this whole task of trying to bring him back to life. And it's such a strange turn for the film. I'm not saying that in a bad way, but it's definitely like, if you're not really paying attention, it can feel very out of nowhere that this film suddenly goes so to these places. Which as a kid, I'm sure flew straight over my head. Like they never say like, he got pneumonia. But they like, you can tell basically off of everything that happened. And then like Casper even says, he's like, and I didn't go to the place that I was supposed to go. Which, that's why he's a ghost and he's not, it's why he's still here. And part of his, I guess, unfinished business they present is kind of the idea of exonerating his father, which they do and they don't. But it's the scenes themselves as part of the film work extremely well. The reveal where Casper kind of puts it all back together is done extremely well. The emotion in his voice is very genuine, so shout out to Malachi for that. And these are just really well done scenes. Like I said, it's not the turn that I would have expected a Casper movie to take, but they are tremendous scenes done extremely well.
Yeah, I like all of the stuff about like, Casper just like being a little boy at the end of the day. And what's interesting about like his backstory and stuff is that this has never been explored in Casper lore before. Casper,
Right.
I mentioned it started as these theatrical shorts, but it also not long after its creation started being published as comic books and has had a lot of long comic book runs. And through all those times, never talked about him being alive, his death, nothing like that. And in fact, I was reading that like there's some comics that imply that his parents were ghosts and there's like a family of ghosts. Very strange. So this is like all original to this film, like diving into his backstory and everything. And like I said, I think it's done pretty well. I kind of respect that they can put some of the stuff in a kid's movie in a way that's digestible for kids. Even if some of the sadder elements maybe went over our heads back in the day. But man, his toy room, whenever a cat sets up all of his old toys and that big carousel and the train, my note says Casper's toy room is sick AF. It is so cool. That's something I distinctly remember watching as a kid. Like, man, I would love to be in that room and play with this stuff because, they established that he lived long, decades previously. So it's all like, wooden toys and old mechanical stuff. And it's rad.
It is. It's a very cool room. My note was, man, Casper's dad was loaded. But between all the toys this kid has and his whole secret laboratory, that dude knew what was up. But yeah, it like you said, this is genuinely unexplored territory. I don't know if they've ever tried to go back since this and try to spin it a different way, but yeah, they definitely went a little off book here to kind of explore this. Because, and that's the thing. It's like Casper to this point was very much just that wasn't why you didn't read the Casper comics or watch the cartoons to find out his tragic backstory of how he died. He was just a ghost. That was his thing. And it's definitely an emotional level that this movie goes to that, like you said, it handles it pretty well, I think. And yeah, these scenes in particular are great at building that.
Another moment I love with Casper and his boyish charm is when we find out that the treasure that we've been, led to believe is in this house through these like secret cryptic notes that were found was actually just a game that he played with his dad where they played like they were pirates. and he hid his treasure in a vault, and his treasure was an old baseball glove and a baseball. That's what's inside the chest ultimately. And Kat asks, she's like, "That's your treasure, a baseball?" And he says, "Yeah, signed by Duke Snider of the Brooklyn Dodgers, my favorite player." And I was thinking to myself, I was like, that is such a baseball name. Like, that has got to be like a, Duke Snider sounds like just a made up old timey baseball name. But Andrew, that's a real player.
Yep.
Duke Snider
Absolutely,
played for the Brooklyn Dodgers from 1947 to 1962, and was actually alive when they made this movie. He didn't pass away until 2011. So, R.A.P. Duke Snider. What a truly awesome old school baseball name. But I thought that was a lot of fun. It kind of gives you a time frame for like when he was alive. Presumably the 50s is whenever Casper passed away.
Also, just to establish here, given that Duke Snider was still alive when this movie came out, that baseball's worthless. So it being signed by Duke Snider means nothing, Casper. Don't get excited.
If the person's still alive, the signature is worthless, Andrew.
Yeah, no, I'm kidding, obviously. Yeah, it's interesting because the
basketball signed by Michael Jordan. What a piece of crap it is. The dude's still alive.
He's still alive, man. It ain't worth nothing. But
Andrew,
you hang on to it now.
This is a true story. Legitimately, something my brother said. My older brother, 4 years older than me. I will never forget this. He talked about, he's like, "Man, if I was Michael Jordan, I would just sign like a bunch of basketballs and put them away like in a closet. So like if I died, my family could sell all my signed basketballs and have a lot of money." As if
Michael Jordan is not one of the richest people in the world.
He had it all worked out. He had it all planned out though. Just sign a bunch of basketballs when you die.
Oh my god,
it's a good plan, Josh. I hope he followed. I hope he listened to your advice.
Liz just literally came to check on me because I was howling so specifically. But dude, I'm gonna be laughing about that the rest of my life. I'm not even kidding. Oh man. Anyway, I do actually love that reveal that his treasure is something that's a treasure to him and no one else. And like the note being on the deed is just Casper and his dad having fun with their game.
Yeah.
I do love that in turn means that Kerrigan's entire quest for this entire movie is for nothing, because she deserves nothing. And yeah, this movie plays really fast and loose because as we find out later through this film, Kerrigan ends up dying and comes back as a ghost with the intention of bringing herself back to life. But then they inadvertently make her cross over because she doesn't really have any unfinished business. Like, she's got nobody. She's got no friends or family. There's literally nothing left for her on the earth. So she crosses over and it's just like, oh, she's just gone forever. Ooh, goodness.
And then, Dibs, she punches through the window.
Yeah, he's clearly dead too.
He's dead.
But yeah, I do love that reveal. It reveals again just kind of the wholesome nature of Casper and how mostly what Casper wants to do at this point in the film is just he wants to come back to life, but it's also about exonerating his father. Like, he managed to do this, he just never got to show the world that he could. So it's this deeply sentimental track that just unfolds in the latter half of this film, and I think it all works really well. I guess it should be also noted another alum of the show is in this film. Garrett Ratliff Henson plays this whole subplot of the school, which we've not even touched at this point. Kat goes to a new town, she's in a new school, and the gym is having asbestos removed from it, which, good. But they have to find a place to have the Halloween dance, so they decide to have it at a creepy mansion that Kat lives in. But the boy at school that she kind of has the hots for is played by Guy Germain from the Mighty Ducks, making his way back around into another beloved 90s family film. He is assisted in some of his antics by Jessica Wesson, as Amber, who is basically Kat's kind of antagonist throughout this film. She kind of hangs out with Vic and is kind of annoyed by Kat's presence, and they plan this big kind of stunt for the dance, which I don't really know what it was supposed to do. Like they were going to come out as this giant ghost, but it clearly would have been Amber on the top half. So I guess it was supposed to make everybody scared, but I don't know why it would. But they get spooked by the real ghosts, and end up running out of the party. So the party ends up being this huge success. One of the other things I do find funny, this is relating to some of the direct to television prequels they made for this, is that some of the people that are in this movie in cameos end up reappearing in some of those other films. Like Rodney Dangerfield plays a supporting character in Casper, A Spirited Beginning, and then Kathy Moriarty actually plays a character in the one they make after that, Casper Meets Wendy, where Wendy is played by an extremely young Hilary Duff. Strange things happen in these films. And also, what I find even funnier, Ben Stein has a brief, like, blink and you miss it cameo in all three films. Because he's in this one at the beginning as our lawyer, who is just over and done with Kerrigan's antics at the beginning of the film. And he reappears in both sequels as very, very similar mannered characters. That was kind of Ben Stein's thing at the time, though. He just showed up and was kind of the driest person imaginable, leading to his Visine commercials, where he did a whole thing about being dry.
Or red, dry eyes. He's such a 90s celebrity. I know, like, Ferris Bueller's the 80s, but I think of 90s movies like this, or The Mask, or Win Ben Stein's Money on MTV.
Yep.
I mean, he was seemingly everywhere for a decade.
He was. And, you know, he's just like you said, a strange career, but just full of these kind of small bit parts that he shows up in. But yeah, Ben Stein, just like a litany of cameos in this movie. They just don't stop. But that school subplot it's pretty inconsequential to the main actions of the film. But it does culminate with, you know, Kat gets her dance with the briefly alived Casper, during which in the middle of he turns back into a ghost and everybody runs out of the party, horrified at seeing a ghost. And, you know, great success.
Good stuff. This movie has some very specific tropes in it. Tropes that I associate with the 90s, but certainly existed before then. Things like a lost treasure. The idea of finding, like, an old map that leads to a lost treasure. Such a movie trope. Here's a very specific one. A Rube Goldberg machine that makes breakfast. That is such a movie trope. This is like, you know, Pee-wee's Big Adventure has
Back
one
to
of
the
those.
Future. I mean, whatever. Yeah.
Yes. And also the idea of, like, this secret laboratory with this elaborate pull this lever, the chair spins, it goes down a chute. That, as well as all the automated stuff, like brushing his teeth and shaving and stuff. Such a movie trope. Such a thing that has likely never existed in real life, but I swear I've seen in 10 different movies.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I said, Back to the Future is kind of the big one I think of immediately. Pee-wee being another big one. But yeah, even kids' movies where there's kids' versions of it, or cartoons. Stuff like Dexter's Lab, just playing with that whole idea of, like, automating your mornings. Because, you know, mornings are hard. But I ain't trusting those razors, that's for sure.
No.
Absolutely not. There's no way. But yeah, that whole, like I said, the third act of this movie takes a wild twist. But it's definitely got some of those. It's definitely leaning into some of those tropes, but they make them stand out for sure.
Andrew, there's a great little exchange in this movie between Bill Pullman and Christina Ricci that I was kind of floored by, considering this movie came out in the 90s. And I think it works well as it does. I think in large part because we have women writing the screenplay. And it plays out a bit like this. Dr. Harvey realizes that Kat is starting to get into boys. because she doesn't want to dress cute at the party. She wants to look nice. And he starts fumbling over his words. They go, well, it's probably time that we should have a talk. And she says, it's late for that, Dad. And he goes, how late? She goes, oh, don't worry, not that late. And then they kind of move on. And Andrew, they're talking about sex. Like, the translation here is,
Yep.
Maybe you and I need to talk about being safe and having sex. And he's like, oh, no, I got it. And he's like, oh, you said you've already had sex? And she's like, no, not yet. And then that's it. And he's a little, like, uncomfortable with getting the words out, but he doesn't like, oh, you're into boys? Who is he? What's his name? I'm going to go talk to his parents, get all defensive and weird about it. Like, it's a totally mature conversation with a teenage daughter and a dad that plays out exactly how it should, but how it never does in movies and TV. But it does here in Casper in 1995.
Nice. Yeah, I do agree. It's a great sequence. A lot of the sequences that Kat and her dad have in this movie are really done well. The sequence towards the end where he has turned into a ghost and he's dealing with the situation, like, he doesn't remember his life. Like, they're like, this is Kat, and he's like, he has no idea who that is. And she kind of forces him to remember, and that whole exchange, despite the fact that she is once again having to emotionally act off of no one, comes off extremely well. So the movie does do a great job of building that relationship, even right at the beginning, where, like, she kind of calls him out on like this is within, like, the first 10 minutes of the movie. It calls him out. She's like, you're not going to find Mom. You know that, right? Like, and he kind of stops, and they make that promise where he's like, if I don't find what I'm looking for here, that's it. We're done. We're finished. This quest is over, and we're on to the next thing. It'll be, basically, I'll go get a real job after this if it doesn't work. Which is interesting to me because it sort of implies that he hasn't actually found any ghosts to this point.
They're so shocked to see Casper. It's like, this is what you want, right? This is what you do, right?
Yeah, this is. I imagine it'd be more like you'd be like Chief Wiggum, where it's like, can you deal with this? I mean, I guess it is my job, right? Like, no, he's like floored by these guys, and I was definitely kind of surprised by that, where I'm like, oh, you haven't actually dealt with this yet, or he's dealing with the more like the idea of the unseen spirits or something like that. But I always find that funny because it's like a weird tacit admission that you've not really actually dealt with this before. It's all the sequences with Kat and James, I think his name is, are done really, really well. I do really like that intro scene too. Like, I like that she calls it, because it's kind of that thing where, like, the implication of the news story on them is very much that, like, he's doing this kind of trying to find his wife, and if he can help out other people along the way, he will. So I kind of like just calling him out on that immediately, getting it out of the way, not letting it kind of be that weird kind of cloud hanging over the movie. Although we do get a very touching scene where it's a very odd sequence of events, but basically after James Harvey dies, there is one light bulb of life juice available for the machine, but only one. I guess after this we can't make any more. But no. You would think he wrote that down, but it's so Casper kind of very nobly, and you can tell that Casper's like Casper's very upset and very disappointed that he's not going to be the one that gets to use his dad's machine. But he gives it to Dr. Harvey instead. Dr. Harvey comes back, now has to reconcile why there's a dead body of his at this construction site. Apparently, as a reward for his noble actions, and also apparently by the actions of his three buddies, they found the ghost or the spirit or the angel of his wife, who is the one that allows Casper to kind of come back to life briefly, 2 hours, it sounds like. Which is weird, because that whole sequence at the dance, like, did they just dance for 2 hours? That seems pretty short. Like, that sequence goes by really fast. and then he just turns back. But
It actually took him a long time to get dressed. He had to go find his clothes. He had to run around.
yeah,
He comes back naked, as you can't help
Yeah,
that.
as you would.
So he's got to
as you
go
would.
go through his chest, find the right clothes
Yeah.
for the dance, come down. It took a while to
Yeah.
get ready.
Hey, you got to look good. But she also has she then appears to James and kind of tells him, she's like, you got to stop looking for me because you're not, basically tells him, like, you weren't going to find me because there's nothing left for me to do here because of the relationship that the three of them had. It's a very touching sequence where he kind of gets to close off his story of finding his wife. I do find it odd that she never appears to Kat, though. Seems a little strange, but it feels in a way like Kat's a little bit more moved on from losing her mom, while her dad is kind of still living in that place and not wanting to move past it. And it's that was something that really only hit me this time. I've never really thought about that before. I'm like, you'd think if you had a chance to come back even briefly, you'd appear to your child. But I'm watching the movie wrong. But the message that she has was for James more so than anybody. But
Right.
it's all it's very well done. It tugs on the heartstrings. Plays to some cliches, obviously, but I'm not going to be too upset about that just because it's a cliche. It's a cliche for a reason. And when it works, it works. It really doesn't matter. So all that hits. It makes the movie end on a very poignant note. I also I do love that the ghostly trio just kind of breezed past the fact that they were planning to kill Dr. Harvey at one point. They just straight up they were like, let's just make him one of us. And they were like, yeah. And then he reveals that he actually likes them. And they're kind of like, we can't do that. And he just dies anyway. And they're kind of like, okay, you guys could have saved him. You could have done that. So, the end of the movie is him
Not
being
nearly
like,
as
"All right."
funny, though.
Not nearly as funny. I just love the end where it's like, the party's not over. Hey, guys that let me die, play us out. But ends it on a high note, though. But a whole lot of good stuff working in this movie, I think.
It's a very Beetlejuice ending where it's like there's ghosts in this house, everyone else is scared except our main characters, and then they play a big musical number. It's the classic Casper the Friendly Ghost theme song by Little Richard. And then the credits start to play, and then Stretch comes back onto screen dressed up as Little Richard with the wig and everything. So that, weird, but fun. 1995, I'm kind of surprised Little Richard's the direction they went, but it makes for a fun ending.
He was still kind of slightly, no, he was not. Pretty fun. Yeah, like I said, though, it ends it on a high note. Basically, it kind of definitely bridges that, we're all kind of on the same page now. The ghostly trio and Dr. Harvey have their kind of level of personal appreciation for each other now. Kat and Casper kind of got their moment. Everybody kind of is, ready to go to the next stage of their lives. Although you do wonder, like I said, the movie talks big about unfinished business. What is the ghostly trio's unfinished business? They never actually dive into what it is. And Casper's too is kind of left up in the air. You would think that proving his father's machine worked and kind of exonerating his name would be his unfinished business. But obviously they're never going to tell anyone about the machine, and they can't do it again. So,
Andrew, you're watching.
I'm watching the movie wrong. I'm too far down the construction hole here. It's not working. But yeah, like I said, a lot of good stuff here.
Two down, 3 to go on our month of cartoon adaptations that are in live action, or however I found a way to make that concise in the intro.
Jesus.
But 2 down, 3 to go here, Andrew.
My God.
There was a lot of these in the 90s. I think they've kind of slowed down on these adaptations in recent years, huh?
Yeah, there was a brief period of time there where it felt like we might be trying to do the TV as movies again, or 80s TV as movies again, with things like the A-Team and Baywatch, but most of those weren't super successful, so it feels like it kind of got kiboshed there for a while. So yeah, it feels like we're kind of shifted out of that.
Well, even like cartoons specifically, like there's a lot of live action adaptations in the 90s. And if like now we're back to like CG, there's a CG Grinch, there's a CG Adam's Family, Scooby Doo. Like we're not interested in seeing people do it anymore.
True,
It's a shame because I think
people,
a lot of fun.
When you really think about it, people are the worst. So I get it.
The less people, the better. Get people out of my movies.
Looking at people is so annoying.
All right, well, we got more of these adaptations to come this month. But before we get to those, it's time for the question of the week. If you want to ask a question for a future episode, you can do just that. Just hop into our Discord server. There's a link right there in the show notes. We'd love to have you if you're not already in our server. This week, the question comes from Oculus Neko, who asks, which horror movie stuck with you the most through the years? And what was the first horror movie you ever saw? And how old were you? All right, a few things to unpack here. But first and foremost, we have horror movies that stuck with you the most. I mean, there's a lot of horror movies I like, but I think what she probably means by stuck with you is like it kind of freaked you out. And that feeling stayed with you. And the first two to jump to mind for me are The Blair Witch Project and Paranormal Activity, the original. Both of which, I mean, Blair Witch especially, I was pretty young when I first saw that, when it first came out. And me and my brother were a fan. I remember watching it with my cousin one time who lived like way out, basically in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the woods, and we watched it late at night and freaked ourselves out. And to this day, I can watch that movie and totally buy in and get pretty freaked out. Same with Paranormal Activity. I saw that in theaters, having never seen a trailer, never heard about it. Mutual friend, Doug, just invited me to go along. We went and saw like the midnight premiere, and like the finale of that movie, I jumped out of my chair. It's the only time I've ever had like a physical reaction to something on screen. And that has certainly stayed with me over the years. So yeah, something about that, that found footage stuff, when it's done well, man, it sucks you in, at least me.
Yeah, it definitely became this trope that got really overused. And I think that really did distract from the times that it was very effective. Because it could be done extremely effectively, but it's the fact that there was this litany of found footage films in the aftermath, because people would just be like, oh, buy 4 GoPros and, shoot a found footage movie. And it, there was a lot of variation in quality there. I wouldn't have put it on my list, but I do want to agree with the original Paranormal Activity. I watched that movie, and even in the aftermath of watching it, I think I pretended that I didn't like it and I didn't care. And I was like, I was just watching people sleeping in a bed. But I remember watching it for the first time. Like, I watched it on a whim on like Netflix or something. This would have been like 2010 or 11. It was before I moved back to Houston, so I was still living in Huntsville because I was in my apartment. And I'm watching it, and the whole time I'm just kind of like, ugh, man. And then I get to that sequence where she gets dragged out of the bed. And I'm like watching it, and like I'm engaged, don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not like writing it off, but I'm just kind of like, all right, some footsteps, some creepy stuff. All right. And she gets dragged out of the bed, and I was like, oh, whoa. And then like I felt like the movie kind of very similarly went back to that thing. We kind of went to our Pullman. I was like, all right, cool. And then I think I watched 2 immediately afterwards, and the scene in the kitchen where like all the cabinets and drawers like explode open at the same time had the same moment of just like, oh, whoa, oh man, oh Jesus. And then like I finished and I was like, all right, I guess I can go to bed. And like I went to turn off the lights and I was like,
it's just that uneasy feeling that just like sits in your chest and like won't let you relax.
I'm gonna leave those on. So yeah, whatever game I talked in the aftermath about how Paranormal Activity wasn't effective was a lie. I actually might do to rewatch those. One, I definitely wasn't the first horror movie that I saw, but one that definitely stuck with me was the first Insidious. The first James Wan, Patrick Wilson vehicle. But just like, man, and specifically, I think it's the usage of Tiny Tim's "Tiptoe Through the Tulips" to the point that song like unnerves me now, because I believe something bad is going to happen anytime I hear it now. But they used it so effectively in that film That even in the trailer for the new one, when it like played briefly, I was like, oh no, absolutely not. The first Conjuring, very similarly, a lot of very big scares and moments. Really, when I remember, those are two horror movies I really remember from when I like really started going to the movies all the time and like watching stuff on the big screen. Trying to think of the first one I saw. Like I remember
those three movies you mentioned. I'm glad you brought them up because I associate them all with each other. Paranormal Activity, Insidious, and Conjuring all came out within a few years of each other, and it felt like that ushered in like this new era of horror. Like the three really high quality horror films, because like, I can watch like trashy horror films and have a good time, but those three were really like a cut above, and were all very different. You had your found footage movie, you had Insidious, which I had never seen anything like it. That's like a haunted house on film. Like instead of all the scary stuff hiding in the dark and being jump scares, it puts it right there in the middle of the screen for you in a way that I had never seen before. And then Conjuring was kind of like your classic horror film, just done really, really well in the modern era. So yeah, those three, I gotta agree with those shout outs.
Yeah, they've all stuck with me in various ways. Trying to think, like I'm trying to think of any recent horror. Like I really did like Evil Dead Rise. I did just see that one. But it's like I wouldn't put it on par with any of those as far as like how it's going to stick with me. It's definitely, I think, extremely well done. But it's two different conversations. Like, is a movie good or is it going to stick with you? It's weird.
Using that language, two different things. There's a movie that I always describe as, I think I like it, but I'll never watch it again, so I can't really tell you. Hereditary.
Yes.
I saw in theaters. There's a scene in that movie, there's a shot in the movie that it will never leave me. I will never forget it. There's a couple of them, actually.
Yeah.
It will be with me the rest of my life. It makes it so hard to recommend to someone. It's like, like my dad likes horror movies, and so like I kind of recommend it. I was like, well, don't watch it with the kids or with my stepmom. Like, if you want to check it out, do, but like, you can't go back once you watch it. It's that thing. Yeah. Like, I don't necessarily recommend it because I think I have nothing bad to say about it, but also like my feelings are so. It's hard to separate. Like, do I like it because it's effective? Do I really like what it's doing? It's complicated, but it's the kind of thing you'd usually go back and watch a movie again to really settle your feelings, and I just can't bring myself to do that.
I will never go back and revisit it for different reasons, but I do agree that there are a great many effective things in that movie that do definitely contribute to me being like, all right, that's not like my thing with Hereditary is I'm like, did I not get it? Like I see a lot of people rave about it, and my stance is kind of like, did I let the overhype kind of dig into my enjoyment of it? But in that same vein, there are a great many sequences in that movie where I'm kind of like, I think I'm good not going back. No disrespect to Toni Collette, Ari Aster, or anybody involved. Tons of great performances all around that entire movie. But yeah, there's some stuff in that movie where it's like, I don't need to. Like, I see a dog sticking its head out a car window driving down the street, and I'm like, dog, cut it out. Like, get back in that car. Thanks, Hereditary. But anybody, don't stick your head out the window of cars while they're moving, folks.
I can answer the first horror movie I ever saw. I'm pretty certain of this, and this is only because I've been told the story my entire life. When I was, 3, 4, so young that I don't remember. I was with my grandparents, and my grandmother rented it. The Tim Curry one from Blockbuster.
Pretty sure that was the only one at the time.
Yes, of course. And I guess she saw a clown on the cover and thought it was for kids. I don't know why this happened.
Wow.
But I watched it, and I was terrified of clowns as a kid because of that movie. Like I said, I don't remember physically sitting down and watching the movie. I do remember being scared of clowns. Like, I got over it pretty young. I'm not scared of clowns now. But I don't remember this, but like my grandparents, my parents, my brother, I've heard the story my whole life. So yeah, when I was way too young to see it, I saw it.
That is, I probably also saw that when I was pretty young. if the first 20 minutes of RoboCop counts as a horror film,
I mean, I'll leave an
think,
impression. It'll stick with you.
I think that's definitely something I saw when I was younger. I know things like Aliens or Terminator I probably saw when I was younger too. Like, I'm trying to think of I don't remember the first slasher film I saw or when I first saw one. That's a tough conversation to really think about. Like, 'cause nothing sticks in my brain. I do remember there was a weekend where my sister's friend, my brother and I, we went down to Blockbuster and just kept renting Nightmare on Elm Street sequels and watched those. But I was well into high school or college by that point. So yeah, the first one is a little bit tougher for me to nail down, but I definitely think the more recent ones. That's why partly I'm really excited for Insidious 5. It's going back to the beginning. I really do like how Insidious 1 and 2 fit together. 3 and 4 are fine. They're both basically just prequels that deal with the ghost hunter characters on other adventures. And like I said, they're fine. They if you like those characters, you like the general vibe, it's all fine. Lee Winnell's involved to some degree with all of them, but Patrick Wilson and Ty Simpkins both coming back with Rose Byrne for another installment. Patrick Wilson directing, that's definitely got me interested. Lee Winnell did the story. So I'm super interested in that Insidious follow-up just to see if it can if it even remotely captures that energy of the first film. It's definitely going to be something I enjoy. But that first one, there's a particular jump scare in the first Insidious, and it's shown everywhere. I hate that they spoil it so hard. But he's just talking with his mom in a room. We may have even talked about it on the show before. But they're just having this conversation back and forth kind of about the nature of this thing they're dealing with, and then it just cuts back to Patrick Wilson once, and the lipstick-faced demon is behind him, and there's just this sharp music cue, and it's the definition of a jump scare, but it's one of the ones where I'm like, it's so effective, and it just burns into your brain. But you type Insidious into Google Images, and that image of the thing behind him is one of the first things that pops up. I really do hate that it's just out there, it just totally takes away from the moment if you know it's coming. Those three though, they all stick in my head. I've never gone back. I know there's many Paranormal Activity films. I don't think I've ever watched past 2 because I know they kind of go in this different direction, but I've heard that it all kind of comes back together at the end of the day. So I do need to go back to sit down with that franchise and finish it out.
I think I made it 4 entries deep, and I think there's 6 total off the top of my head. At one point I bought them all for real cheap, so I got to do the similar marathon. I got one last shout out for a horror movie I saw when you were too young before we get out of here. It is. I remember watching this at a different set of grandparents' house late at night, and it was this really freaky movie made of short stories with a bunch of images that scared me and stuck with me. Like this ghost of this little girl who's talking about how a stray bullet from a drive-by shot her, and she's holding her guts in her hand. Or this girl that had the ability to draw people on paper, and it becomes like a voodoo doll, and she drew this guy and folded the paper up, and you see his body get all contorted and folded up. The movie I saw was Tales from the Hood, which is a group of black filmmakers that came together to make this anthology horror story that was... Why young Chris Logan was watching it, I don't know. It was on HBO or Showtime or whatever, and I stayed up late and watched it. But stuck with me, freaked me out. I imagine if I went back and watched it as an adult, it'd be a lot cornier than I remember, just based on the cover and poster and things that I've looked up ever since then. It scared the hell out of me as a kid, though.
Yeah, that's definitely... I could definitely see that. There's a sequence, I'm trying to remember, I think it was from one of the Leprechaun films. There's a sequence where the leprechaun just exaggerates all of this woman's features until she explodes. And as a kid, that sort of thing sticks in your head. But I'm trying to think if I saw any of the Friday the 13th or any of the Nightmare on Elm Streets when I was a kid. One of the first films I remember seeing in the theater was Ninja Turtles 3, and I know some people would just... No, I'm kidding, folks. Hashtag PG. Fun stuff.
What movies traumatized you as a child? I want to hear all about it. Let us know. Let us know on social media or hop into that Discord And until next time, just remember that maybe not every movie is great.
But all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. You can check him out on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony. And thanks to Mitch for the music. You can check him out on Twitter at I'm a Biggie Boy, and check our show notes for the SoundCloud link. Check out our store on TeePublic for Best of the Rest merch. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. It's the only way that we grow. And follow us on social media at BOTRcast. Thank you. Harrigan Crittenden. Crittenden?
Crittenden.
Kerrigan Crittenden, the woman that hired Dr. Harvey, is that off?
It's off. Crittenden.
Crittenden? Crittenden?
No.
Kerrigan
Crittenden.
Crittenden?
Just go
I'm
with
saying
it.
it right,
Just
right?
whatever. I don't know, man.
Kerrigan Crittenden,